OK, je suis vraiment content d'annoncer cette deuxième table ronde de la journée qui porte, on l'a intitulé Projet de vie et génération future. So this second roundtable is called Life Project and Future Generation. It's going to be Étienne Levac is going to be in charge to animate this roundtable. Étienne is a PhD student at the Université du Québec à Montréal in religious sciences. So I say no more and hand over to Étienne. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Emile, and welcome to the second roundtable. The objective of this roundtable is to better understand the perspective of younger generation on the GBNQA, and we will listen to those perspectives by listening to people of the EU and Naskapi Nation. Unfortunately, Suzy Kauki wasn't able. Oh, she's here. Oh, well. We will listen to the perspective of EU Inuit and Naskapi nation and gain insight of their political aspiration for the future. So let's begin. So first off, I'll let our panelists introduce themselves and share their thoughts about the 50th anniversary of the GBNQA. So. You can start.
Hello? Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Leona Shecanapish. I'm from the Naskapi Nation of Kawawachikamach. When I was 17, I left home to join the Army. I was there for 6 years, and I employed in Afghanistan in 2020. So at that time, I was a teenager. I didn't fully understand to be a Naskapi woman because I left home early. So being in the military for 6 years gave me a different world view from being from a community and in the Army. So they're two different really lives. So it was just hard to adjust to come back home to the community. And I'm still navigating through that, just to integrate myself into the civilian life again. So even from being in the Army, living on the reservation till I was 17, and then living here in the city. So there's 3 huge adjustments in my life that takes time to adjust. So after the military, I went to CEGEP. I earned my diploma. It was social science. That's where I learned mostly about residential schools. That's when they started talking about the residential schools, the colonization, the trauma, 60 scoop, and et cetera. When I was growing up, these topics weren't really talked about in school or in my household. Like you can see, but it was never talked about, especially the trauma. So during my CEGEP years, I went to a wellness treatment who a residential school survivor ran it. So during that time, I learned a lot from her. And that's when I started my healing journey, and because I understood more about the trauma where my parents and my grandparents came from. So it just opened up my eyes in a big way. And that treatment, that's where it helped me to be proud of my identity, and I wanted to know more about it and represent it. So after that, after CEGEP, I continued my studies. I moved here to Montreal. I studied at Concordia University. I earned a Bachelor's of Arts, First People Studies, and Law and Society. I took some political science courses, and it really intrigued me to know more about the political side, especially the agreement we signed in 1978. Excuse me. So I wanted to know more about the agreements and how we got there. How did we end up signing the agreements? So I did my research. I asked a lot of questions to the elders, the formal and current chief members. And it became a passion for me to be part of the political side, I'd say, of things. So after I graduated, I decided to stay in Montreal because the housing crisis, not a lot of students get to go back home because there's no housing. So I stayed here, and I started working at the Native Friendship Center. That's when I met the urban Indigenous community. And then on Tuesdays, I collaborate with a research team with the University of Montreal. It's a managed alcohol program. It focuses on harm reduction. And it's the only one in Quebec focused for Indigenous people. We're trying to implement it, hopefully one in my community. Right now, I'm currently working as an administrative assistant, mainly with the chief herself. And I sit on the board of directors of the Naskapi Development Corporation back home. I also sit on the housing committee, even though I don't have a house. I allocate the houses. So it just, because I see how difficult it is for a lot of families, small families. I just like, I guess I'm not ready to apply because I really want the people that struggle overcrowding to get it. So hopefully next year I'll, get one. Also, it's all voluntary based, the housing committee. So I've been there 6 years, and hopefully I'll get reelected. There's nominations this week. It's just through that work, I've seen a lot of strengths and challenges about the housing we face. And I'm like deeply passionate about helping to improve that part, because to me, it's personal, because like I really want someone to feel they have a safe space, they have a home, especially the kids, to have a room, to have memories, not to move house to house. Yeah, that's really one thing that I'm really passionate about, and hopefully to improve. Thank you.
Thank you.
Should I go or do you want?
You can go.
Yeah.
Hi, everybody. My name is Jedidat Matoush. I'm from the Cree Nation of Mississippi and Iwishi. I am... Charles? I smiled at you. I recognized you, but I don't think you recognized me. Oh, okay. I must recognize you from Facebook. So yeah, I've been in Montreal for many years, since the year 2000. I went to CEGEP. I was a flight attendant for Air Quebec for a couple of years, and then I went back to school. I went to CEGEP at John Abbott College, and then I did my bachelor's and master's in sociology at Concordia University, and now I'm in my 7th year of PhD in political science at Concordia as well. So I've submitted my thesis. I'm just waiting for feedback, and hopefully I'll defend it in the next couple of years. But I also work. I teach for the IK program, which is a special springboard program, a collaboration between the Cree School Board and John Abbott College for Cree students. It gives them the chance to stay up north for the first year of their CJEP so that they don't have that cultural. What happens often is that Cree students come to the south and then they have a huge cultural shock and they have a hard time, you know, fitting in and figuring things out. So what they do is oftentimes before the first year is over is that they quit school and then they go back up north because they're homesick or whatever. So this gives them the chance to do the first year of CJEP from home online on Teams. I also teach at university, so I teach in the political science department at Concordia University, a class called Indigenous People and the State in Canada. I don't know, it sounds weird. I wouldn't have worded it like that, but where we basically talk about Indigenous state relations in the Canadian and the Quebec context. I do consulting work also for CNG. So, and I'm the assistant coordinator for the Cree Nation Research Institute, which is an up-and-coming organization that hopes to be able to govern its own research in Iwishi, and will eventually be called Ashukin, which means bridge. So, but again, it's up and coming, so it's not really established fully yet. So I don't know, I don't feel like a youth. I turned 40 in June, so, but, so I was born 10 years after the JBNQA was signed. I guess all I can say is that when I was in the sociology department for my bachelor's and master's, I studied theories of nations and nationalism. That's something that really inspired me. That's when I started being interested in Cree governance and Cree nation building and politics. But it was very much in line with this idea that, you know, the Crees were building a nation in the image of Canada and Quebec. They were mimicking Western politics. And I kind of viewed it as a type of assimilation. That was my approach back then. And then when I began in the political science department at Concordia, I started reading the post-colonial or the critical literature by Indigenous political scientists. And again, it kind of influenced me to see Cree nation building and governance as, you know, this idea that they were conforming to Western values and being assimilated by the dominant society. But what happened was about 2 years in my PhD, I started just randomly showing up at conferences and meetings by the Grand Council, CNG, Cree School Board, anything I could find that was in the area. And I began realizing that the theories that I had studied in sociology and in political science didn't match what I was experiencing in real life. So instead, what I was seeing was Cree leadership who were working really, really hard at trying to balance modernity and development with culture, heritage, and the preservation of the land. I witnessed hunters, tallymen, land users interrupting Cree leadership and chastising them for not respecting certain, you know, parts in the JBNQA or in any other subsequent agreements that was focused on land and the rights of land users. I also witnessed a lot of discussions happening in the Cree language that felt sometimes like it was often being used as an act of resistance to speak in Cree and to not revert back to English and French. So I just realized that the theories of nations and nationalism and the theories of this idea of resurgence versus reconciliation, you know, that they're two distinct things and that they're in opposition with each other. This isn't what I was seeing, what I was experiencing in reality. So, of course, being in the political science department, I focused on politics. And I started to dig and I started to research the JBNQA and all of the subsequent agreements that came after it that, you know, rectified a lot of things like the extinguishment clause and self-government at the local level and so on and so forth. And yeah, and that led to my PhD research. So, which was a combination between work I did as a consultant for CNG, and my PhD field work that I combined with permission from the Grand Council, of course. And I'll save the rest for later, because if I start talking about my research, I might go into the next questions. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Suzy?
Hello, can you hear me properly?
Yes.
Wonderful. Well, first of all, thanks for having me here on the panel. I couldn't make it in person. It would have been amazing to meet you guys. So my name is Suzy Kauki, and I was invited to join this panel to talk a little bit, so here I am. I'm a mother of 3 children. I'm Inuk from Nunavik, Quebec. I don't like to say Nunavik, Quebec, because I think Quebec is in Nunavik and not Nunavik in Quebec. And I currently live in Kuujjuaq at the moment. My occupation right now is I do research in the justice field. So I research a lot about, the justice system, the court system, the incarceration, and more specifically to policing in the north. I've lived both down south as well as in the north. So I got to live, the best of both worlds. I was a student at Carleton University from 2018 to 2023. There I studied legal studies and sociology. My experience in this moving down south and becoming a student, I can hear my story when you guys were speaking as well, and how difficult that can be. Right now, I work with Nikan Productions, formerly known as Tair Inu, and this organization does documentaries on First Nation, Métis, and Inuit people across Canada. And I'm working specifically with them on policing issues, and we're creating a documentary on police brutality in the North as we speak. I'm also a assistant researcher for Laval University. I work with anthropologist Caroline Hervé, and she guides me in a lot of the research that we do together. I do a lot of advocacy work around Nunavik on Inuit rights and trying to educate mostly the non-Inuit population on our rights, such as the James Bay Northern Quebec Agreement, the 1982 Constitution, and whatnot. I first learned about the James Bay Northern Quebec Agreement in 2012. I always knew about it, but not so much in detail. It is not a topic that was discussed, especially in our classes in high school. I think we knew more about the German history than we knew about our own agreement. It wasn't often talked about at home because during that time, during the negotiation and even to the Constitution, our elders, such as my grandfather, Charlie Watt, was never able to be at home for a long period of time. Our fellow signatories had to travel a lot, and after he negotiated the James Bay and then the Constitution of 1982, he became a senator, and he served in the Senate for 34 years. In 2012, we were in a youth conference where we were exposed to the topics of, the different treaties, and we understood that the first modern treaty was the James Bay Northern Quebec Agreement, and what kind of impacts it had on the community. So those are the things that I really try to carry on my shoulders. That's how I learned about the JBNAQ. Is after 2012, we started to do a lot of research on the topic, and then started to ask a lot of questions to our fellow signatories in trying to understand what kind of impacts we were facing. I say I'm a product of the James Bay Northern Quebec Agreement. I was 14 years old when this agreement, so my father, I'm his first daughter, and I was born into this history without really understanding it. And it's something I understood at a later age once I got older and more interested. I'm happy to see this kind of conference happening, especially organized by universities, and it's very inspiring to see that people are really starting to take interest in this modern treaty, which this modern treaty influenced our constitutional rights as Aboriginal people across Canada. I was very excited to watch the previous panelist. I saw Mr. James O'Reilly, and I also saw my grandfather, Charlie Watt. And it really made me think of Peter Hutchins, who was their lawyer during those times. Peter Hutchins also created the law school at McGill University. So, yeah, my name is Suzy, and I'm also a founder of a new organization called Napavik. And this organization was created after studying the justice system. And we understand that the imposed justice system is highly influenced by the James Bay Northern Quebec Agreement. However, when we go around the community and if we ask judges or nurses or doctors today if they know anything about the James Bay Northern Quebec Agreement, often we are met with the question is, what is that? So it's my lifelong goal to continue advocating Inuit rights, and thanks for having me.
Thank you very much. You talked about different challenges in your nation. You talked about housing crisis, mobility issue, balancing cultural knowledge and political legal engagement, police brutality. What are the main challenges facing the younger generation in your nation, and how do the JBNQA respond or fail to respond to those challenges?
Hello? Okay. For the Naskapi youth, there's several challenges for the youth. So there's the education and training, the housing, urban navigation, there's trauma and mental health, language and culture. So one main thing I really want to bring up is to access to like post-secondary and colleges, because the closest university from our community is here, English, the Concordia or the McGill. Even though that we have programs that McGill have brought to the community and some SAGIPs brought to the community, but it's more so I want to speak for the high school students who are just finishing high school. So that transition there's a gap. There needs to be training programs, trying to get a higher education can be complicated. Youth need guidance and ongoing support to apply, relocate, and to succeed. I really love the program that you mentioned and gives me an idea. I'm going to talk to John Abbott. Also, the housing for the rental applications, and even to find safe and affordable, and to navigate around the city with the metro buses and metro, and just to feel safe in a city, even if it's the first time that you leave your community. It can be overwhelming and a culture shock, like she mentioned. Even the dealing with racism and discrimination, most of us we don't experience that back home. So if you're first time coming to the city, you don't know what it is. You don't know what's going on. They don't understand. There's so many students I've seen that struggle trying to find rent and to feel safe in the city, especially if you're alone. And most of them go back home because there's no support in each city where we mainly come to is here Ottawa and North Bay. Most go to Ottawa and North Bay because it's English, because they're afraid here it's all French. Most, when I meet people, they're always like, wow, you live in Quebec. Why don't you speak French? I'm like, well, you're on Indigenous land. Why don't you speak our language first? Anyways. Another thing is the trauma and mental health. The social challenges affect many young people, the intergenerational trauma. To access cultural safe healing, counseling, wellness services, it remains limited in the community and outside of the community. The language and culture, that's a really big one too. Like when you move away, you don't have people to talk to in your language. When I left to the military, I could see that I was starting to lose my language because no one was around me. Yeah, there's phone calls, but being in the military, you don't have much time to connect to the culture, the traditions, because it was far away. And it was just, the challenges for the youth, I feel like they're gonna expand, and I wanna help with that for them to be more confident to access education. So I think the agreements, they provide frameworks for self-governance and financial support, but they don't always meet the practical needs for the youth. So these agreements, yeah, they protect our rights in principle, but the implementation always falls short, I find. And especially regarding the urban migration, mental health services, and youth-specific programs. Thank you.
So what are the main challenges? So one thing that I kept from the resurgence paradigm that I was talking about earlier, one thing that stuck with me was that modern day treaties, or not necessarily the treaties themselves, but the agreements that come after, the self-government agreements, they do a lot in terms of economic development and capacity building and education and all that stuff. But they don't do very much when it comes to the well-being of Indigenous people. The holistic well-being, so everything, physical, mental, spiritual. And that's because it's not money that heals the wounds of the past, it's culture. So to continue on what I was talking about earlier, part of my PhD research was to see how important culture was in programs and policies in UHG. And because it's one thing for Cree leadership to talk and say that culture is important and the land is important and language is important, but how does this translate at the community level? What impact is this having on the Cree people at the community level? So I think we all know by now that the links between culture and well-being and healing. So part of my research was just going to different communities in Iwishi and seeing, I was a consultant for CNG, and they're trying, Cree leadership is aware of this lack. They're aware that the JBNAQ and the Cree Naskapi and the governance agreement and La Paix des Braves and all these agreements, they're aware that it's done a lot for the Cree people in terms of opportunities and capacity building and education and economic development, but they realize that there's something still wrong with the Cree people, especially the youth. And you can see this in communities with, self-destructive behaviors, violence, drug addiction, alcohol abuse, and so on and so forth. And part of this is because of that lack of identity and lack of sense of belonging that a lot of Cree youth have. And Cree leadership are aware of this. They know that it's a problem, so hence the reason I was a consultant, because they were trying to put together some sort of comprehensive, holistic after-school program for EU youth that would entail this idea of holistic well-being. So a healthy mind, a healthy spirit, and a healthy body. So what we did is we went around the communities and we discovered that most, if not all, of the communities in Iwishi are all looking for the same thing. And obviously one of their concerns is language and technology. They feel like social media, gaming, and all these things is taking over the lives of the Iwinu youth. That's not just up north. I have 2 sons and I can attest to that. And we live here in Montreal, but so they're afraid that the youth are losing their language, which they are, and the influence of social media and gaming and Netflix and all these things. The other was community involvement and kinship ties at the community level. So because of the residential schools and because of all the intergenerational trauma that has resulted from the residential schools, the elders and the youth do not communicate anymore. And the youth do not communicate with their parents as well as they should. And this is isolating for the youth and creates a whole set of problems that I won't get into right now. But their major concern in all the communities we visited was this idea that culture is confined to cultural camps outside of the communities, that they require resources to be able to attend, time. So we're talking, 30-day canoe brigade, where the child has to, well, first of all, it's not good for small children, so it's more older teenagers. It's voluntary. So these have to be youth that are willing to go, that want to participate. So it doesn't necessarily, impact the youth that need it the most. And then you need money to buy a sleeping bag, to buy good boots, to buy, warm clothes, to get there, transportation. So what the communities were telling us was that they don't feel like culture, language, and land-based activities and practices should be confined to cultural camps or to special activities, or they wanted culture to be brought back into the communities and part of everyday life. So anyways, I don't know. We did the report, we handed it in to CNG, so I don't know what's gonna happen with all of that. But the main challenges facing young people, a disconnection with their culture, with their families, with their language. That's probably the main thing. They have no sense of self, no sense of belonging. They don't fit into the white world. They don't fit into, right now I would say that what they identify with the most is res culture. So, local gangs, a lot of violence, stabbings, this idea that you have to be tough because if, you're so res. But that connection with their culture, their language, and the elders in the communities is very, very weak. And until that's fixed, until the youth can have a good sense of belonging and identity and sense of self, unfortunately, I think it's going to continue to be like that. So, but again, the Grand Council, the Crees and CNG are aware of this, and they're really trying hard to implement programs at the local level that will hopefully, nourish this curiosity in the youth of who they are as a people and their culture. So, stay tuned.
Thank you very much. Suzy.
Well,
Yes.
thank you so much I can totally relate to both of you, Leona and Jedidat. Do I have it right? Wonderful. Everything you both just said it resonates with our community as well. And I can only speak on behalf of Inuit, although this agreement touches the Naskapi Nation and the Cree as well. It also has a huge influence on our constitutional right. And everything you just said, I can completely relate with you. Leona, you mentioned something about the implementation of the James Bay Northern Quebec Agreement is a big challenge in itself, and I can totally agree with that. The main challenges I experienced as an Inuk woman who's a James Bay Northern Quebec beneficiary is the implementation of administrative services continue to be recognized as non-ethnic bodies. So a lot of the times when we're working with the education system, the justice system, the housing, environment, everything that relates to our rights, it's very hard for these administrative bodies to recognize our Inuit rights under this modern treaty. I think that is the main challenges that we face. We continue to fight for self-determination, and we continue to redefine self-determination. And what does that mean for an Inuk person? What does that mean for my children and my grandchildren? We want to be able to determine ourselves, and we want to be able to make decisions for ourselves. But with the way the implementation has been laid out from the very beginning, it's still very hard to reach that goal. So it takes a lot of effort for the youth to advocate their rights. So that is the biggest challenge for me as an Inuk woman. I would also love to have relationships with the Cree and the Naskapi. All these years, it's been 50 years since the James Bay Northern Quebec Agreement has been signed, but we often don't know much of what's going on the Cree side and the Naskapi side from an Inuk perspective. So that is also very challenging. When I went to Carleton University, there was quite a few Cree students. One was from Wet'suwet'en, and he would talk a lot about how students on the Cree side would travel during high school to visit universities, to visit colleges, and to try to see what kind of education that they would want for themselves. It's very different here in Nunavik. Our education system is very isolated from the rest of the education around Quebec, and especially with other First Nations. And I wish that there was more communication and more relationships between us, and that way we can be more self-determined in the way we govern our nations with this modern treaty. I really think that the Quebec still has a lot of influence in our organizations, and we continue to have the attitude of being reminded that these organizations are non-ethnic bodies. And I like to remind these people that these organizations that are non-ethnic come from an ethnic modern treaty. So that's what youth face today. We know the impacts of intergenerational trauma. We know that we were a very traumatized nation, and we have a lot of healing to do because we're grieving. And I find that post-trauma services are almost they're very much non-existent. However, on the positive side, they're becoming more popular with our use of culture and our use of our access to land. We have a lot of land here in Nunavik, vast, lots of water, lots of rivers and oceans and animals. And the good thing about that is we're starting to see our youth be more involved in these activities. Yeah, and I think it's just a matter of ensuring that our youth continue to know their rights, and it's a matter of Inuit to advocate that. But to this day, we're really struggling with being recognized within our own institutions. So yeah, that's all I have to comment on for our main challenges with the James Bay Northern Quebec Agreement. I would also like to confirm our language here also in Nunavik is weakening. It's becoming harder for the youth to communicate in Inuktitut, also because of their access to social media and all types of resources, online resources. So we really want to bring back our language. And we know the only way to bring back our language is by the use of land, because our language is in connection to our land and our culture. Yeah, it's just a matter of really struggling with how the government still continues to say that that we are in Quebec when, you know, we were in this territory way long before the James Bay Northern Quebec was ever signed. So
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much for your insight. So now we will move to the world of all possibilities, the future. So, what dreams or projects do you have for the future of your nation?
I just want to follow back what she mentioned for the youth, sense of belonging. That's the one thing I had a really difficult time. Since I live here, I don't feel like I really belong here. And then when I go home, I still feel like I don't belong there, because mainly like because I don't live there. And another thing is that when I see people, they're always like, oh, when are you going back? When are you going, like, when are you leaving? You know? So that's the one thing I think that hurts me when, like, when are you going home? They say, like, home to Montreal. I was like, what do you mean? This is my home. But I don't have a home. Okay. I just wanted to bring that up because I know that feeling where you kind of lost your identity and like a sense of belonging. And that's what the youth need to like really I really want them to feel empowered as a Naskapi person. Okay, for the vision for the future is to see the Naskapi youth empowered for sure, and living in both in the community and living outside of the community. The language, culture, identity, and navigating with a sense of belonging and overall their mental health, well-being. I envision programs like education or transitional programs I mentioned before, the employment, the housing. One of the programs that I helped bring was the treaty simulation, which is like a mock negotiations that the youth participated, mainly high school students, young as like 12 to 17. They were really excited to learn about the treaties, the governance, and the decision-making. And afterward, it's the Gordon Foundation that helped us develop the treaty simulation, and I'll pass this around if anybody wants to see it later. It's the Gordon Foundation that brought this to our community, and they go to every community. I believe they've been to the Cree, and so the students want the Gordon Foundation to come the following year, which shows a real interest for them to learn more about our treaties. And the kind, it shows that there's a real desire for them to take part in nation's growth. And programs like this are the kind of initiatives I'd like to see more for the youth. Even outside the community, like a youth trip. Or even like, let's say there's a chief and council are leaving for a conference. They could bring a youth with them. like the high school students, like Sec 5, I'd say. Just for them to see what happens and like, just to hopefully follow the steps if they're interested. I already know one girl, she spoke at the event and she's like, I'm gonna be the chief. I'm gonna be a chief one day. And that's the kind of like confidence I wanna give to the youth. Also, I wanna bring more mental health and healing resources in the community and outside for the students. So these agreements can be powerful tools for progress if they involve in today's realities. If the direct funding are that go toward like youth mentorship and educational mobility, urban navigation, also like a culturally mental health programs, mainly that focuses on the Naskapi youth. And it's just a real life support. Real life support is crucial, I find, for the youth. Ultimately, I want to see the youth take leadership roles. A lot of them are shy and like social media taking over, they rather talk on text than in person. So I think there needs to be more programs that that they can have a voice. That I really, it's just like I really want that for, like I see my nieces and nephews, like they're gonna be hopefully leaving like to college, and so like I want them to be prepared, like every student. I know a lot of students that want to leave, but it's just like to navigate to leaving the community. Like even people at my age have difficulties finding housing. Like even for me, I had difficulties because sometimes it was like the way I look, or you know, you can feel if there's like prejudice or discrimination even today. The leadership roles that could shape our community's future to preserve our culture and language in the political and social science spaces. So agreements like the NICA can provide structure, but it's up to us to ensure these frameworks really meet our needs for the youth. I just want to say a quote from Maurice St. Clair that always sticks with me. It's famous. I'm sure a lot of you have heard it. Education got us into this mess, and education will get us out of it. So I just really am passionate for the youth. I really want more youth to be empowered and have confidence. Even the adults who are interested in the political side. One last note I want to add is English is my second language, and if you see me in meetings or like conferences we have with our community, I speak in my language, and I feel more confident and like I'm so empowered. So that's the one thing that I really love, to speak for my community, the youth. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, do you want to go?
Yes, I'm thinking.
Ah.
Yeah, and just to add on a little bit what she's saying though, they have to take us back when we're done our education to the communities. Because I moved from Mistissini to Chibougamau when I was a child so I could go to school in French because my father thought it would be more practical for the future. So I spoke English in the home, French with friends in school, friends at school, and out and about. And because of that, I never learned my language. So what happens is that they push you, the Cree School Board sponsors you, Cree leadership pushes you to go to school, to live in the city, and it's long to do a bachelor's, and a master's, and then a PhD, as you know. Yeah. So then years later, you're applying for jobs, and then they say, oh yeah, but you don't speak your language, or you haven't lived in your community for over 10 years. And it's like, better, Come on. Anyways, that's just adding on to, so you have to, I didn't mind not speaking Cree when I was a kid, but it's starting to get, okay, now I'm just venting. So what dreams or projects do you have for the future? I just wrote here, a happy and healthy nation with a clear vision of who they are and where they are going. One thing that I should add on my comments earlier was that I think Cree leadership at, whether it be the Cree Nation government or also the Cree Health Board or the Cree Board of Health or the Cree School Board, they not only do they realize that there's lacking in a sense of identity and belonging and culture, but they're also starting to get worried because they wonder who's going to replace them when they decide to retire or when they, simply pass on, because a lot of the original leaders are old. I can't say that. Are getting older, and they're starting to worry about who eventually is going to replace them. And to be a good leader, you have to be willing to fight for your culture and to know who you are as a person. So it's kind of like a double, they have a double goal, I guess I could say. They want to improve the well-being of the youth, and they want to diminish the social problems that are occurring in the communities, but they also want to build a strong Cree society for the future with young people who know who they are and where they're going and who will fight for their rights. Because as we all probably know, negotiating with the states and agreements and self-government is not a one-time deal. It goes on and on and on. It's I think you wrote an article, the never-ending something. Anyways, so yeah, and they want youth to be able to step up and to take over this this role. So my dream for the future was that in Iwishi, we have holistic, universal programs and policies aimed at identity, culture, sense of belonging, and sense of self to create a happy and healthy Cree society.
Thank you. Suzy.
Nakukmik, thank you, Jedidat and Leona. Yeah, I thought about this question for a while, actually. And again, I'm going to speak for my nation, and I also would like to speak for the Naskapis and the Cree as well. But I'm going to stick to my territory and kind of explain what kind of things I'd like to see. So same thing as Jedidat, we want to see a healthy community. And for me, I want to see a healthy, safe, and protected community for the younger generation. I really hope that our younger generation will be empowered and that they do have a sense of belonging in the organizations that are implemented in Nunavik. I really hope for language support for all the youth that live here in the north. I hope to see organizations that are going to train Inuit properly in ensuring that they take on the leadership roles. You didn't want to mention the word old, Jedidat, but my grandfather is 81 years old now. And he was a very young man when he signed the James Bay Northern Quebec Agreement. And a lot of his fellow signatories up in the north are no longer living with us today. Only a few of the signatories continue to be alive. And I really, really hope that our governance and our leaders are going to give that space for our youth to have that confidence and empowerment to take over one day. And our signatories have been saying that from the day one. You guys will eventually have to take over. You're eventually going to have to be the ones negotiating. The work is not done yet, and the work is going to be continuous for a long time. Fighting for self-determination is not a one-time thing. It is a lifelong journey. And as youth, we have that role to take eventually. I do worry about who's going to replace my grandfather when he's no longer around, because his presence today is still very, very powerful. And I don't want youth to navigate in their world thinking that they don't belong or that they're not important. Just the fact that the youth were born into this nation is a very, very proud thing. Our signatories fought for us, and I hope that our youth are going to be given the opportunity to continue to fight. Yes, organizations will not always be very welcoming to our fight, but I hope that our youth will not give up and that they're going to continue. When I went to university, I was 27 years old. At 27 years old, I thought going to a university was going into a big giant building. But really, I was going into a community. It was a campus. And one time I tried to take a shortcut through the tunnels, and I ended up out on the very opposite end of the campus because I did not know how the life was as a university student. What I knew was that my school board was saying, go to school, get the diploma, leave your community for a bit, and then come back. But when I did that, little did I know I was going to be facing housing challenges. I was going to be facing, inflation of prices with a very small budget to find my housing. And I had 3 children at this time. I want organizations to put more cushion around the services that they promote so our youth can actually achieve in finishing their post-secondary education. I really hope to see better mental health and healing resources, as Leona mentioned, and mostly in post-trauma. I hope to see all organizations in Nunavik being trauma-informed, and that they train themselves to be trauma-informed, and that they train themselves to understand our modern treaty rights as well as our constitutional rights, our United Declaration right, the United Nations rights. We have rights all over the place, and I hope that they're going to grow and to know all of these things. When I was a youth, I did not know a lot about the negotiations. I didn't know a lot about our history. Like I said, it was in 2012 I learned about this, and then I started educating my children about it. My children are aware of residential school. Me, at the age of 20, I did not even know that my grandparents went to residential school. Little did I know that my own mother went to federal day school. Given all of these things I just said, I just really hope that we're going to provide a safer, healthy, and protected community. I want to see Inuit police officers. I want to see Inuit doctors, lawyers, judges, anything you want to become, you can become. So that, and also I hope to see more use of our land. And I am seeing it more though. A lot more younger hunters are going out there to learn about the land, and there's education out there on the land. Don't think that Western education is the way to go only. You also have your culture, your heritage, your language, your animals, everything that makes you who you are today. In order to be a good leader, you need to be a good hunter, a good citizen in our community. So that's all I wish to see in my community, so they can be empowered. I want to prepare our youth for education. Okay, you want to go become a lawyer? You want to go become a doctor? Well, here's a list of things that you're going to need to know. Here's a list of how much it's going to cost in your region, how much money you're going to need for your rent, for your house, for your budget, because all of these things, it's not in our everyday practice back home, eh? Back home, we have family. Back home, we have country food. We have access to land. But when we go to school down south, we're completely disconnected from that. And that's why a lot of our youth go back home before they're even finished their diploma. So I hope that made sense.
Yes, absolutely.
Look at me.
Thank you very much to the three of you. So we will now open up for question in the public.
Koi. Jenek Kazwan, Ishinaguzin de Jenek Kazwood. I am only 77 years old. And one day when I be grown up, I want to be a lawyer. I want to be a lawyer like James O'Reilly, but a better one. So my wish for you three beautiful minds is that stay forever young.
Thank you.
Look at me.
I had a question in regards to education. I was wondering if you had any views on the project of the new Inuit Nunangat University and if you had thoughts on that.
I think a university in Inuit Nunangat is very important. I wish it had existed decades ago. I think it would be very important for Inuit in their territory to be able to access a university. Now, if there's a Inuit Nunangat University that's going to be placed in the south, that's where I would have some questions. But I think it's a good step to self-determination, and yeah.
Hi there, my name's Christy. I've worked a lot in the field and on the ground with youth, and I mean, youth is like 17 to 35. And I've seen a lot of individuals come from different northern communities, arrive here with like an intention, and then really, really quickly become displaced. When there's no support here or like family members or somebody that you know, it's very hard to navigate. And you can get caught up really quickly, especially in urban spaces downtown, and derailed. And I mean, when you're overwhelmed and you're confused and you can't find your place, like I think any individual, like what do? Like we choose to like maybe numb ourselves or like to kind of not deal with the consequences because there's too many factors that come in all at the same time. So I'm kind of interested in a little bit for the youth that do come here for education or end up coming to the city for whatever reason. When they arrive here by themselves, like how do we ensure safety upon arrival and proper like support and guidance? I think it's a really crucial thing for the youth coming here because the thought and the aspiration to come and try something new can turn real quick. And I've seen it happen a lot. And it just really worries me. And I've, from my experience, from what I've seen, this is something to really think about.
I often,
Go ahead.
I often think about this question a lot, and I encourage all of our school boards to start thinking about a safety plan when they're sending their students out into the urban world, and to provide more guidance as to knowing about the way of life in the city. Because we're coming from a way of life in the north, and then we're trying to go to school, or speaking for the youth. If we don't provide them safety and guidance, as simple as where's the library? You need a library card. This library card can give you access to free resources in your city. This library card can give access to tutoring for you and your children. How do you get around by bus? What grocery stores cost less? What areas are more affordable? All those kind of things, if you guide us, even if it's just one student through every step of the way, you're going to achieve a lot more. You're going to have a lot more graduates at the end of the day. But unfortunately, school boards are like, here, go to school, get this diploma. But it often feels like we're being thrown into a jungle that we've never been into before. Like I said, my first year of university, I was 27 years old, a grown adult. I was trying to use a tunnel. There's no tunnels in the north, none, zero, no basements. And I was rushing for my law class, and I ended up on the opposite direction. So when I got out of the tunnel, I had to run back to my class covered in sweat. And I had no idea that it was a class of 400 students. No idea. So that gave me so much anxiety, and I swear to God, I almost quit university that day. And if it wasn't for Indigenous students, like people like Cody Sandy from Watmagustri was supporting me. He said, hey, no, don't give up. You're smart. You got this. You know, sometimes so without him, I would have barely made it through. And also things like, how do you stay away from navigating yourself around substances? We have a very high rate of substance abuse in our communities, and we have so much more access to alcohol and other substances in the city. If there's been created more security around this area, I think we would have a lot more graduates. Thank you.
I'm taking one question online. It comes from Martial. To the panelists, what are the steps taken to help understand JBNAQ and NEQA for the youth?
Do you want to add something before?
Thank you.
Well, I think for the Naskapi, that's one of the treaty simulation that we hosted this year. That would so the mandate they were given was through the NICA, our agreement, like negotiating with the Naskapi, federal, and the provincial. So I think through that, maybe some of them never heard of it, but because there were a lot of questions. And we had the chief and the deputy chief there and another counselor for them to have an input what it takes to have an agreement with the governments. So I think it's one good step to for the youth to start knowing how it is to negotiate. And I know the deputy chief, Nathan Unia, mentioned that it's just not, you're going to say yes, yes, yes. It takes years, you know? So they were kind of like, wow. So there's a lot of patience. And I think that's the one thing a good thing that came for them to learn. Thank you.
Yeah, I think in the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s, a lot of the push by leadership in Iwishi was to, for this idea of going to school in trade schools and how to learn how to be able to participate in the economy of the North, the extraction of natural resources. So, you know, Satuan built schools in a couple of communities, and it was, you know, the jobs were related a lot to mining and hydroelectricity and all this kind of thing. But what I see more now is kind of like this shift to, like we also had a simulation like she was talking about for the JBNQA, and then there's, you know, Cree History Month, which is ironic, but often looks at Cree history from 1975 onward. You know, there's documentaries, there's all different kinds of things. A Cree culture class in schools in Iwishi that teach about the JBNQA and Cree history, especially, like I said, from 75 onward. So yeah, instead of focusing their attention on educating the youth to go to school, to be able to participate in the economy of the North, it's a lot more about, you know, this idea of cultural identity, political identity, national identity, and oriented around rights and being able to sustain these negotiations and agreements with the state. So, yeah, did I answer that question? Kind of, yeah.
Thank you. We're taking one last question from the audience.
Hey, Suzy, you can't see me right now, but
Maling Alen, Aileen ito sa kami, Alen.
so I have the same sentiments that each of you have concerning education and the future of the identity of Indigenous peoples in Canada. The way that I understand it, my hopes and dreams, I'm implementing my own hopes and dreams for the future, is that maybe potentially Canada will follow suit in the HBC in terms of the fact that they've ceased to exist as an entity almost entirely. And I know this is a contention against what's been happening. I only say this because I understand almost the entirety of the Canadian history is gone against eliminating us, our own existence, either if it's by force or if it's removing us from the land or assimilating us into the Canadian culture, thus waiving our rights to Indigenous, our own rights as Inuit, as Indigenous peoples. So my question is like, how can we remove these kinds of Canadian values that are enforced upon us in our education systems to learn about Canadian history, and instead of valuing the mainstream societal norms, is basically placing value into our own cultures. And this is a sentiment that I'm hearing from each and every single one of you, is that all of us feel lost every time we have to come down to the South and learn how to speak English properly, learn how the politics work, learn how to vote, learn how to all these things. And a lot of these things are, you have to teach yourself. You have to put your own drive to prioritize Canadian identity over your own identity. So how can we, we're the way that I understand it, we're kind of in the midpoint. Canada's 150 odd years. HBC held its regime for 355 years. So if we're calculating how many generations it requires to reach that point where Canada doesn't exist anymore, this is approximately 7 generations. So this is kind of resonating with the great prophecy of the First Nations of the Great Lakes, talking about the just 7 generations of moving towards what it means to be an Indigenous person living on our own land. sorry, this is more of an opinion than a question, but how could we work towards, by valuing our own identities and our own cultures without necessarily relying entirely on the Canadian government?
For my community, I'd say to start from home for the language, and you teach them their identity, the traditions, and where, like the history. So after you mainly speak the language at home, you should. And then in daycare, they learn like songs in the Naskapi and like numbers in the Naskapi. They all learn in the Naskapi. So and then this recently changed in the education system. Now there's more Naskapi classes, and like they learn about the Naskapi history. Whereas when I was in elementary, I just learned the Naskapi language, what I remember. And I wasn't told that my grandfather was the last nomad, like 1956. I didn't know that. And so I think what the education system now back home are trying to do is like focus on the younger generations, like elementary, for them to learn their identity, who they are, and continue on to high school. Like really explain and help them learn to find their identity and who they are and to be proud of it. So that's what I've been seeing, but obviously we can always improve and or have more programs. Like we can have programs in after school in the evenings for them to learn more about their traditions, and they have been doing it. Like there's community hunts, like youth are taking like 8-hour skidoo drives to go hunting. And then they come back home and they're taught about the caribou from the elders, and we have some young hunters. There's drums making and the history about the drums. There's a lot. And obviously I'd like to see more and more youth especially to join. And it could be more intimate. Like there's even programs in the weekends where they're taken out on the land and they're taught about the medicines we have and how it's used. So like we didn't really have that when I was in elementary. I just remember a week of going to the camps. It was grade 6. It was always like that, just grade 6. So, but this time around, what I'd like to see is for them to really have a sense of belonging and be proud of being Naskapi and know where they're from. Because when I left the Army, I didn't really know. People were asking me like, where are you from? Naskapi Cree? But because nobody knew Naskapis back then, because it was so small. Yeah, I think language is where we need to start first.
Thank you. Suzy?
Hi, thank you. Thanks, Leona. Hi, Charlie. Long time. I recognized your voice right away. I'm gonna comment on what you said and answer your question. I think it's the most important thing is knowing who you are and where you come from. I remember when you were just a teenager, you joined the Canadian Roots Exchange, where we traveled and we met with other Indigenous youth, and you met some youth from Winnipeg. And during this time, it's the time when we really started to talk about residential school and the impacts it has and what Indigenous people across Canada go through. And during this time, we started to learn a about our own history, and you've grown so much since then. And your name is Charlie, and you know where your name comes from. I think what you're doing now in your life is the answer to how we can continue growing. I think we need to be resistant to Canadian policies and procedures. And you mentioned the HBC. We know that the HBC was present. We know the impacts and we know the truth of their history in Nunavik. Knowing the truth and history is very important to continuing to advocate for our rights. You're a very resilient person because you come from very resilient people. And I know that personally. And the fact that you're able to navigate in an urban world and come home is the right thing to do. Know where you come from and know that people fought for you. Even your father was also a very big negotiator back in the day. Those are who we are and who we cannot forget. As much as you can, try to speak Inuktitut, because I know when you're not home, it's very easy to lose your language. Inuktitut kayang nanginisalo ko so mataman nati ko metsialo hold your language. With the work that you do with theater, you can re-educate people on our history. A lot of our history is misinterpreted, miswritten by Canadian and Quebec legislations, policies, and procedures. Going back to your identity and sticking to that will help you navigate through Canadian policies and procedures. You mentioned the 7 generations, and it is very true. Our history is a lot like that. And what do we do for the 8th generation? How do we keep that fire going? And how do we keep that resilience and resistance going in the younger generations? You know, I really think that's by, as Indigenous people across Canada, we need to know one another. We need to know each other, and we need to know each other's history so we can be an ally going to the 1982 Canadian Constitution of Aboriginal people. So Sally, it's all about just knowing who you are and sticking to who you are. And that's how we're going to resist colonial systemic policies. That's how we're going to resist systemic racism within our communities. And even for you in the urban world, we need you to come home one day. So we need you to stay there and finish what you're doing because you are an amazing person. Nakumik?
So thank you very much. It's the end of this second roundtable, and I think there is a lunch for Emil. Will say it better than
So yeah, thanks everyone to be there so far. So there's gonna be a lunch gonna be served in a couple of minutes or right now. I don't know. So it's a lunch box. We have 60 lunch box. I didn't count how many people there was here. I guess we're doing good with 60, but in case there are not enough lunch box, there's a cafeteria just right there. I know it's not the best thing, but we had no way to plan for how many people there was there. So there's 60 lunch box. So that's our gift to you. So yeah, that's pretty much it. Now it's about to be 1. Let's try to all come back here ready to listen to other conference by 2. So yeah, have a nice lunch.